So there's lots to discuss as we continue on with the program. I'm going to now bring up to the stage panel number 2, and I'm going to invite Marcela Berland, who will moderate this discussion. Marcela is the founding president and CEO of Latin Insights, LI, a strategic communications firm that focuses on the Latino market and Latin America. LI's clients include political candidates and heads of state, corporations, and nonprofit organizations. Marcela is widely considered an expert in crisis management, strategic communications, and public affairs. And so this next topic is near and dear to my heart as an entrepreneur, which is allyship in business. So please give another warm round of applause to welcome Marcela Berland to the stage and our next panel.
Let me see if this works. Hello? I don't think it's working, but I have a...
I think your lav is working.
Is it? Can you hear me? Yes. Oh, okay, perfect. Well, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here moderating this panel with this very talented group of women. And I want to thank John, first of all, for putting this program together and bringing awareness to this very, very important issue, and all of you for being part of this discussion and dialogue. So today we're going to be talking about some very important issues, the new majority and allyship in corporate America. We heard from a prior panel and also from Sandeep about the importance of the new majority. And now what we're going to be talking primarily is about how do we make sure that the new majority has a place in corporate America? How can we make sure that they have a voice? How can we make sure that they're being heard and they're being promoted? I believe strongly in statistics. There's a lot of talk, and we work a lot in DEI, and we hear a lot from our corporate clients about the importance of DEI. But unfortunately, when we look at the statistics, if we look at Fortune 500 companies, we see that there hasn't been much progress, and there is mostly white, controlled by white male CEOs. So the numbers and the statistics are startling. So I want to start by asking you about the new majority. What do you think about this concept, and how it is impacting your corporations, your companies, and what are you doing to make sure the new majority has a voice in corporate America? We can start with you, Yau.
Yau Cheng, I'm Global Head of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at BNY Mellon. And when I think about what we can do, my company, as well as what I can do in my role, I was really struck by what the previous panel said, and talking about how all of us together, private sector, public sector, need to work together to advance the cause of diversity, equity, inclusion, and the power and influence of this solidarity in the new majority. What they said, human rights and putting the most vulnerable of our society at the center of their work, there's parallels to what I do and how I think about DEI work in the corporate environment. And when we put, in corporate America, when we put the most underrepresented, the most underserved at the center of our strategies, and we work to change our practices, policies, and systems so that there's equity for the most underrepresented, and they're able to succeed, their voices are heard, their talents can come to play in how we make decisions and invest and move our companies forward, it actually allows everybody to be successful. And that's where we then leverage diversity, equity, inclusion to drive high performance and productivity, deliver for our shareholders, and also enable our people to then go forth and build stronger communities. They come out of their communities, come into the workforce, they go back to their communities, and they can strengthen their communities, and economies get stronger. So really, it makes sense that there would be parallels to what the private sector do to what we should do and have the opportunity to do in the public sector. And then making sure that as we build this new majority, we don't lose sight of the differences in that large new majority, and that we continue to listen and evolve and make sure that those voices and our differences still matter, because that's how we continue to sustain equity.
That's a great point. Thank you. Kathleen, would you like to share your experience?
Sure. Kathleen Navarro. I head up talent management, and I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at New York Life. And I'll build on what you said, starting particularly at that last point in being able to keep the unique needs of communities top of mind, but also leverage collectively, the needs across communities. And having strong programming in place is really critical to this. And I think for companies, people are at different areas of the maturity curve as to where their programming is. Cultures are different. I think it's hard you can't just lift and shift is what I say, right? What works at one company may not work at another. And so it's really understanding your culture, the needs of the workforce, and prioritizing and thinking about how you can focus on diversity, which is the representation, but also equity and inclusion, and the culture of the organization. And so providing platforms for having courageous conversations, right? New York Life, we started that in 2016 and have had more than 35, I'd say, company-wide conversations on a variety of topics, which has been instrumental. It's really one of our signature programs. But those programs are also opt-in, so we've thought about ways that we can have a wider reach, and thinking about topics that are really critical and timely, and started a program where departments now do training through these conversations, right? And having ways to think about intersectionality and what does it mean, and how can we have 7 employee resource groups, how do we think about the needs of those groups, but then a lot of the needs are also common, and how the groups come together and support each other. And we see a lot of collaboration amongst our employee resource groups, and we see the needs, particularly during these trying times and challenging times that we've had these past few years, where groups help to support each other and come together to either do shared programming, or if it's something that is particular to one community, attend and help to support. And so providing the platform and telling people that it's okay to be able to be yourself and to share your stories, I think is important. Storytelling's critical. And when you hear from colleagues about their experiences, I think it puts it in a different light for people. What we've seen is the workplace tends to be the most diverse community for many folks, not everyone. We had worked with the Center for Talent Innovation back in 2017. They did a study, Easing Racial Tensions at Work. And one of the startling findings of the study was how segregated people's social communities tend to be, their social networks. I think it was 91% of white Americans in this study had said that their social networks were primarily white. And the same held true for communities of color. 83% of Black respondents and I think 64% of Latino respondents had said that their social communities were primarily Black and Latino. But the workplace is the one place where we all come together across a variety of differences, and we interact with each other, and we're friends and we're colleagues, and we share in each other and celebrate the good times and come together and help support each other in the bad times. And when you hear stories and are able to gain different perspectives of people that you know so well, it kind of brings it to a different light, and it ties back to something that was said leading into this discussion about being brave. And it's not easy, right, for people to do that. And so being able to provide a platform and tell people give people a safe space and help train and educate, I think helps to really focus in on supporting across all colors of community and other represented groups and lift everyone up.
Thank you.
A lot was
Tiara?
said there, but I'll talk a lot about strategy. So I'm Tiara Chesmer-Williams. I am Vice President and Head of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equity at Moet Hennessy. We put inclusion first because it's very, very important to our strategy. Talking about inclusion, we are rolling out a number of trainings around how our managers, people leaders can go on this inclusive leadership journey, knowing how to see the power in the introvert, knowing how to give folks that safe place to be creative and innovative, and really branch out so we can figure out where we're leaving money on the table. You know, we are a revenue generating business. We want to make sure that we're inclusive not only internally, but to our consumer base as well. A lot of what we're doing with our ERGs is around allyship, another part of being inclusive. I'll tell a quick story. I'm a storyteller. When I was presenting a new ERG strategy, I had one of our ERG members come out and say, you know, how is this supposed to be a safe place if we have allies or people that are not part of this community, part of our ERG? And I said, well, we're asking our white male counterparts to be uncomfortable. You have to get comfortable being uncomfortable as well. Like, we have to get brave and down with this concept of being open and coming together and inclusive in our nature. So that's one part of the internal strategy. Externally, we're doing a ton of different things where we're going out into the communities and having these listening sessions about how local culture is impacting the business in that market. So really taking those findings and listening to our people, our consumers, our people internally, and translating that into how we run our business. So a few ways around how we're using that strategically, the new majority.
Great, thank you. So I want to touch on something that Michael Garner said in the last panel, and he talked about how usually the different groups, Latinos, Asians, and Blacks, are put to fight against each other. And he was talking about more at the level of, you know, trying to find funds from corporations, but we work a lot internally with corporations, and we see that happens also internally. The different groups within an organization, they're fighting for the resources that the organization can give. They're fighting for promotions. They're fighting for different resources. So there is this idea of, you know, competing against each other. So how do you deal in reality, because you have to deal in the real world, you know, where, you know, the ideas are great, but you have to implement these ideas every day. And how do you deal with that fact and the fact that you want all groups to be ally, you know, the concept of allyship? How can you bring that together and at the same time, as many of you said, respect their individualities? So let's start again.
Happy to start. So there isn't a silver bullet to that, because the reality is we do compete. And as you know, those who aspire to senior leadership roles, fewer and fewer roles available. So, but what we want more of us to understand, and particularly those who can influence systems, policies, and practices, is that the bias that gets in the way of people being fairly assessed, fairly considered for these opportunities, has to be mitigated, has to be addressed, because when we think about the talent available in the market, that we didn't always look for talent where there was diversity. We are changing that with the way that we're working with artificial intelligence and sourcing talent with different schools. Baruch is one of our places where we are sourcing talent, community colleges, HBCUs. We're looking for talent where it has always been, but we haven't included in our processes. And within our workplace, you know, once that diversity is with us, we need to make sure that the way we assess talent, the way we conduct our talent reviews, the way we think about promotion slates, how we view influence as it shows up differently, and personality should not play a part in that. But like Tiara, you mentioned the strength of the introvert. There shouldn't be one mold of leadership or one persona that should be made the model for success. And we've seen, there was a conversation in another forum where we were talking about how there's low representation of Asians in executive leadership, on boards. And the humor in that is like Asia mints the most billionaires, of any country. Obviously, Asian talent is successful, can be leaders, but they're not seen as leaders for some reason in the U.S. So breaking those molds and challenging the status quo of thinking and how we see talent, who can be successful, those are things that we need to continue to work on day after day. And then allying with each other so that those unwritten rules that we didn't always know, or people didn't help us decipher because we didn't belong to the right country clubs, or we didn't come from the certain schools, or we spoke with an accent. We need to sponsor each other. We need to work together to connect each other to the influencers. We need to understand the conversations that are happening in the closed door rooms, and who is making decisions about our career. Do we know them? Do we know people who do know them? And connect each other to those people, make sure we have that visibility with people who can influence our careers. And as we get to those positions where we can influence, just continue to reach down and pull each other up. But it is competitive. But
Yes,
we just
it's a reality.
we can break down some of the bias, and we can make things more equitable.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd love to expand off of that idea. Just having the opportunity to have a seat at the table during our talent reviews, during, the review of our CEO. I got to sit in that review and have a say-so. Like, having that opportunity to have that diversity there makes such a huge difference of our senior talent, because they need to have those checks and balances as well. And speaking of checks and balances, again, another story. I remember so many times that I interviewed with a recruiter, and the recruiter is looking for a certain type of person, whether it be personality, whether it be the school that you went to. So at Moet Hennessy, at my previous organization, which I see as a sponsor, Morgan Stanley, we put in checks and balances around our recruiters and making sure that we were intentional about having diverse recruiters, so they would be intentional about picking various types of people to interview and to get to know, because you cannot put a stereotype, you cannot put this one-line picture of who your model manager or employee is. So I'm so glad that you pointed that out. I'll leave it there.
And I'll just add, I think everything very well said, and I'll just add maybe 2 practical sort of tips to this, is in terms of resources. What we do is, from an employee resource group perspective, we have a very structured process. Everyone has the same budget. We have the same process for selecting co-chairs, have a defined period of time. We, have 4 focus areas that we ask all the ERGs to focus in on. And so providing a structure helps to balance across. And then in terms of the talent discussion that we were just talking about here, reporting and analytics is really key. That's been a very important aspect, I'd say, to our programming to help inform, and also with respect to checks and balances, like you just said, understanding, doing some deep analytics. We have, for example, with recruiting, applicant flow requirements, and understanding what's the pool at the top of the funnel and how does that pool flow through, and are we seeing areas that we need to understand a little bit better why maybe some candidates didn't come through, or looking at the 9-box discussions and understanding here's the population of the group that is being discussed, and then here it is in terms of how people were assessed And does that seem reasonable? Is there any potential unconscious bias there? And trying to embed and build ways to mitigate potential unconscious bias into talent processes and into programming, I think, also helps to ensure that you've got these checks and balances and continues to keep that focus on equity across groups.
Thank you so much. Touching on your last point, Kathleen, about using analytics, we find out when we work with corporations and they said, well, help us with DEI, we want to improve our DEI footprint within our organizations. We always ask if they have any metrics. They're like, well, no, we don't have any. we don't do that. And the first thing we do.
The first thing I think people should be doing, right?
The first thing we do is to really develop, our own metrics and understanding where people stand and understanding not only sentiments but also facts, because you have to really go by the facts. And again, the statistics, when we look at the facts and the numbers, particularly at the top, we see that there isn't enough diversity yet there. And we did a study, we were asked by one of our clients to the study about a diverse pool of employees looking for new jobs and how they felt about the process. And unfortunately, we found that the vast majority, these were all minority employees looking for jobs. They felt that there's still a lot of bias, that the issue of diversity is not being brought up during the interview process. And well, there were a lot of barriers and issues. Once they started the job, there's little follow through. So my question is, why is it so much talk about the topic, but we cannot make the change that we need? Why haven't we been able to really push change in a more accelerated way? And we can talk, I would like to talk either in general terms or about your own experience, but that's the reality that we see, right?
Yeah. Honestly, something that, my whole background is finance, so I'm big into metrics, numbers, so on. And I really feel like if you can't convince someone by just the conversation, or if that person doesn't have enough empathy for someone to change their mind, show them the numbers, because those are hard facts. So that's one way of doing things. But I always give the example around equity. So at Morgan Stanley, I always made the point. So you would have a financial advisor that comes from maybe south side of Chicago, grew up very poor, went to a public high school, public college, so on. You have another gentleman who maybe grew up in a very affluent area in Boston, went to Harvard, so on. Do you think that these two people are going to have the same amount of connections to wealth? Like, you have to give people the resources that they need to be on that level playing field. And those are the type of stories that I tell people to convince them. Like, these are real life people that grew up in these situations. And if you don't understand that, then you shouldn't even be in a power position. You shouldn't be in a leadership position if you don't understand that difference. So I always give real life examples to make people better understand. You talked about storytelling. Like, it's so powerful. And we use it so much at Moet Hennessy, because it's important. I have another story about, one of our very, very high-ranking Black executives. They are the SHIT within the walls of our organization, right? Everyone looks up to them. The junior employees want to be like this person. But when they're outside of the walls, they're just a regular Black person on the street. And they have different stories to tell you. And for people to hear those real life stories makes a difference. So big into storytelling.
Just around data, I think in the past 2 or 3 years, we've gone from having very little understanding and grasp of data of what's really going on in an organization to we're now at the point of almost too much data. And at this point, our managers get it. They understand the importance of this. They understand the value and the business imperative. But they now need help on where to focus and where to prioritize. So we are parsing data around not just applicant flow and who we're hiring and how successful they are, but the eligible population for promotion. How does that break down in terms of different ethnicities, gender, LGBTQ+, veteran status, disability, looking at just all the dimensions of the talent experience, including employee engagement and how that's different for the different populations that we have data around. And we are seeing discrepancies, but the data doesn't tell you why things are going on. So the data can only point us to, here's an area where something is going on that requires further investigation. And then that's where the hard work comes in, where you have to roll up your sleeves and work with managers and say, these are tough conversations you're going to have. You're going to have to talk to people who you don't share a background with and ask them what's really going on here. The Great Resignation has caused a lot of managers to realize they need to be getting to know their people in a different way than they have in the past. It's not just about show up for work, I'm going to give you feedback on how to do your job better. I need to understand what else is weighing on your mind. I need to understand the personal circumstances that you're bringing to work with you that might keep you from being fully engaged or feeling supported, or maybe there's an aspect to our relationship where you're not able to trust me with what's really going on so I can better help you. So there's a lot of really great stuff going on that the data is just a part of. And it's building skills that our managers don't have. They weren't elevated to those positions because they were good at this stuff. So back to training. We need to equip them before we can hold them accountable for some of this different level of leadership and performance. And then, some of the stories of how come we aren't seeing greater progress, it comes down to making those difficult decisions. They can develop empathy, they can put some of these inclusion skills into place, but as they're trying to fill these roles and keep up with attrition, they're still resorting back to kind of the old ways of thinking and bad behaviors of, I need to fill this role, I'm going to go back to my homogenous network of people I know, and we just need to get this done. The business has to move forward. But to get them to stop, allow the recruiters to build the diverse slate, think about the questions you could ask to really understand the potential of this person who might not have come from our industry, didn't do that particular job before, but has great potential to actually exceed what somebody who came in from a different organization and did that job before could do, to drive the business forward, to bring in fresh perspective. That takes time. That takes an element of, I'm going to take a risk because I don't know this person. I'm going to take a risk that I can manage somebody who's different and navigate discrepancies in opinion and people who are going to challenge me. That's, I think, the journey that we're now in the midst of, and we just need to hold the line, and if we can, keep those roles open, support our managers in making different decisions. I think we can actually improve diversity because it's allowing more diverse talent to come in the door as opposed to just filling the seats with, poaching from other financial institutions to fill our roles. And just in terms of storytelling, spending a lot more time with clients these days. And I was in a group of asset managers, mostly men. There were some women. We were talking about their challenges to bring in more women into the asset management sector. And the men were lamenting about, we're looking for the talent. They're not there. They're not there. They don't want these jobs. They don't want to work 5 days a week. They want to have families. All these myths that they're creating and perpetuating to keep, them from really attracting the women into the door, into the sector. And then we started talking about, well, do you have daughters? Do you have, are your wives working? You know, what do they do? Would you recommend your company to your daughter? And the men, like 100% said, no, I would not want my daughter working at my company. The light bulb, you know, like in a position to change that right now. What would you do in order for your daughter to be successful at your company? And that took the conversation to a much more productive area of for some reason, they didn't feel empowered to drive that change, that they could authentically create an environment where they could see their daughters thriving. And hopefully they went back and took action on some of the ideas, but it's like you kind of have to point out the obvious sometimes.
Humanize it.
You're right, and then
Make it real.
But it
Yes.
comes down to tough decisions, doing things differently.
I hear it.
The one thing when I hear this, it makes me about progress. It makes me think about a speaker that we had at New York Life back in 2020, Dr. Valerie Purdy Greenaway from Columbia University, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, but she said some to the point on progress that when people in the majority think about progress, they think about look how far we've come. And when people of color and underserved communities think about progress, they think about look at how far we have to go, right? And it really resonated with me and just made me think about things a little bit differently. And there's no silver bullet, as you said earlier, and I think everything that's been said here is things that companies and individuals should be committing to at your organization. But knowing that you've got to try different things don't, it's not going to be, you put a plan in place and a development program, say, and then that's going to guarantee that all those folks get promoted. That's not reality. And so thinking about the ways you could be leveraging and keep trying different things and having a variety of things, and again, having the metrics and I think that was a great story that you just told. It's true when you humanize it and when people start to see things in a different perspective, helps people maybe take a different approach. There's no easy answer, and we absolutely should be further along than we are, and we have to keep advancing, and companies have to make the real commitment to it and put actions into place.
I hear so much about just intentionality, which has been mentioned
Right,
obviously
yes.
a million times. And I always give the example, you have to be intentional about getting to know your employees as well, your leaders. The leaders have to. You have to know if you have a single parent on your team that can't take a call at 6 p.m. because they have to cook dinner for their child. Like, you have to really get to know your people. If you don't know your people, you don't know their circumstances, you don't know what they're dealing with, and you don't know how they're gonna be the best employee for you. So if you don't know your people, it's a wrap.
So going back to the topic of the new majority allyship, do you think in the concrete work, is it something that it works, or do you think you want to follow a more traditional approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion, being realistic?
Well, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, right? I think what we talked about when we kicked off the conversation about having platforms and thinking about ways and structures that helps communities focus on what may be of particular interest to that community, but then also looking for ways to collaborate and support each other across communities, and particularly, with the new majority, having, employees of color who come together to support each other. It's not one or the other, in my mind. I think it can be both, and we learn from each other. There are a lot, there's experiences that may be different but somewhat similar that help people to connect with each other and support each other. So I think, really, I love the concept, when we talked, when we were talking before the conference and thinking about allyship and talking just about a little bit about the origins of allyship, and really, at New York Life, really started with our our LGBTQ plus community, and helping a lot. The allies are really what helped support that community in coming out at work and having really developing a much stronger, developing our employee resource group and programming and support. And then that sort of started to filter out to other groups. And you were talking earlier, it reminded me of a story with when I co-chaired our women's initiative back in 2012, and we started to reach out to get men to be active because it was really only women, and we recognized that we needed men in the room. And when we did that, I made phone calls and I asked some of the men to join a session, and they said to me, I've been dying to go, like there's great programming, but I thought it was only for women.
Yep.
And then they came into the room, and then some of the female employees turned to them and said, what are you doing here? This is for women, like to your point, like this is a safe, right? And then I was like, okay, then the guys are calling me saying, I'm not sure, and so we had to explain the concept of allyship and how it went across all the communities, right? And how, if we had a room full of women talking to women, that wasn't going to enact change, and how we all need to help support each other. And I think in particular, when you look at communities of color, there is a unique opportunity because of the unique needs, but also some common experiences that can help bring people together and help learn and grow together.
I honestly don't have much to add. You really hit the nail on the head. I mean, this concept of new majority and allyship and everything is amazing, and I think it absolutely can be done. There are power in numbers. There is power in us coming together as a community and standing up for the things that we believe in and the things that we want to change. But there are different nuances that each community faces that need that special attention as well. Speaking of a person of color or a person that looks very ethnic or whatever the case may be, they're going to face different challenges than, let's say, a Cuban American who can pass as a European. So the different nuances have to be there, and those have to be faced and helped and supported, but coming together on our commonalities are amazing, and I think it's something that we should absolutely go for, try to do, and put all our efforts in, not only as individuals, but in our organizations and our companies as well.
And when I think about the promise of the new majority, I look at our employee and business resource groups, and we have 6, and one of them is what we call impact, and it's intentionally multicultural, ethnic, racial diversity and focus. And this was something we did, before my time, sort of when BNY Mellon was growing through acquisition and trying to meld people from different corporate cultures together. We saw an opportunity to bring what used to be separate, Asian, Black, Latinx, into one, because we recognized and really wanted to reinforce the need for multicultural understanding and awareness as a way to drive our business forward. And as we strengthen this group, we continue to recognize that in the largest ethnic racial populations, there was still a need to dive deep to understand that these Asian, Black, Latinx, these are not monolithic communities. There are distinct differences within these communities, and as an organization needing to pay attention to those. So we have an Asian Leadership Forum, a Black Leadership Forum, and a Hispanic Latinx Leadership Forum. And those groups are creating programs, safe spaces, leadership development workshops to get to the nuances within their communities, within their constituencies, to understand what support as a community they need, and then what support cross-culturally that we can drive. And it's very stark when we have these safe space conversations or these forums, how different those needs are. But I can say that across our 6 groups, in order to get budget from my office, they do have to work collaboratively, and they do have a theme of intersectionality across all 6 and coming together to understand each other, to come together, particularly in solidarity in light of some of the external events. And the membership of our 6 groups is growing, I think, because of that intersectionality, that reaching across to understand and support each other. But what I will say is unique membership is not growing. So we need to take what's great being created in the 6 groups and extract that to more of the enterprise to bring more our employees into the 6 groups. But I'll share that at the height of the spike in Asian hate crimes last year, the first person to check in on me was a Black colleague. And I don't say that to say first or second, but somebody who said, I know what that feels like because I've been there. I understand the fear you might be going through. I just want to be there for you. And I think that is an example of just, we can come together through that understanding.
So I want to make sure we have time for everybody in the audience to ask some questions. And I can barely see everybody in the audience with these lights. But
yeah, the lights are bright.
Yes, they are.
If anyone has a question, I want to
There's a question over, I saw a hand go up over here.
Oh, okay, yes.
Hi, my name is Tiara Chesmer-Williams company. So, thank you. I have a question for the panelists. Some of you have mentioned during your speech that you don't want to inadvertently not promote those who are maybe more introverted and only grease the squeaky wheel and recognize those who are more active in terms of promoting themselves. So how do you, assess who are the folks with leadership potential? Because oftentimes, when people who are less outgoing in terms of promoting themselves, they tend to be told we don't have the gravitas that it needs to become senior leaders. So how do you respond to that and evaluate people in a more fair manner?
What I tell people, or what I tell people leaders rather, and what I practice as well, is I call on them in meetings and I force them to talk a little bit so I can hear their ideas. But this all goes back to knowing your people. So those one-on-one conversations to know what their long-time goals are, what their aspirations are, knowing how they need you to support them is so important in those conversations. It all goes back to knowing your people. So.
We also think about the talent cycle and ways we mitigate potential unconscious bias, as I mentioned, and we have our HR business partners who are in the conversations when we're having discussions about people, our annual talent conversations. They're trained to recognize where there may be some bias happening and to pose questions to help people start to think differently. We have a leadership profile at the company, and it's the 8 capabilities of what it means to be a leader at New York Life. And so we assess people against that, right? Try to find ways that we're looking at things that are more, again, equitable across groups, so that you are able to assess each person sort of individually. But building that into the process and the system, I think, really does help to make it a more fair process.
I think I would add is I also get to sit in on talent reviews and coach HRBP colleagues on where to challenge. And one of my pet peeves is, the talent review that extols the virtues of this person who's just exceeded expectations on all these business deliverables and is just, called a rock star. And then the next breath, where we're supposed to identify development opportunities and feedback to go back to this person to continue to improve. Sometimes you get they're kind of quiet during meetings. They don't speak up as much as I'd like them to. Their leadership style is different from mine. And you have to push on that because the skills are there, the results you want to achieve are there. Why do they have to be, more like this or more like that, and more like, a certain leader that is at the head of that particular team right now? There is no reason why that person should be fitting a certain mold. And I think we have to, every opportunity we do is to challenge that thinking, because there needs to be room for different styles of leadership, different communication styles, different ways of engaging with people to get the best out of them. That loud, outspoken person is not going to be the best and most effective person to drive certain results. So it's just challenging that, but there are certain roles that if you want or aspire to, that might require a little more engaging and being comfortable interacting with people. If you have a client-facing role, you're going to need to be a little bit more of that kind of extrovert. Enjoy going to parties and entertaining clients, or if you've got a leadership role where you have to make a lot of presentations, if you aspire to that, your manager should be giving you feedback and helping you develop some of those skills so that you can achieve that if that's your career goal. But for other roles where if you're excelling at what you're supposed to be doing and you're delivering against the results and you're exhibiting the skills and achieving the desired outcomes, then we've got to challenge that whole leadership, the old style leadership mold.
You said something that I think is also very interesting. You mentioned feedback, right? And it's important that the feedback is coming from a number of different perspectives. And so having a process where you can get 360 feedback, or during performance reviews, being able to send it out to stakeholders so that there's not only like one person weighing in is also very important. And then you also mentioned talking about with your manager and about development opportunities, and there's been studies that have shown that women and people of color in particular don't always get the feedback during these conversations that are really going to help the individual in understanding what they need to do to advance to the next level or to grow and develop in their role. And so if that's the case, then it's really important to be asking for that and be open to hearing what that feedback is, and to challenge it too if it's something that you think may not be a variety of perspectives.
Something interesting that you said, Yau, is that there seems to be this conception that there is certain type of leadership. To be a leader, you have to have these attributes, and there has been thousands of books reading about this topic. And I was at Stanford a while ago talking to Professor Jerry Porras, who is one of the most successful professors there. He wrote many books about leadership, but he happened to be very, very shy. And he said when he was at the business school at Stanford, one of the first things his professor said is like, to be a leader, you have to be an extroverted. He named a lot of qualities, and he felt that he didn't fulfill any of the qualities, and he felt really terrible about himself. But then he realized that wasn't, there isn't one mold that fits it all. And he always tells this story. He's a very humble person, very interesting person. But he became, the first emeritus Latino professor at Stanford. Very, 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 very successful. But there isn't one mold, and he was giving us many examples of how there are different type of leaderships. And there isn't only one, and you can see it, in corporate America if you look at the history of leadership. So we shouldn't fall in that trap that to be a leader you have to have certain characteristics. It takes more than that. You have to go beyond that. Let's see, any other questions? I see one in the back. I can see a hand.
Thank you. Just maybe, I guess, reflecting on what you said, is it enough to rely on a manager to get diverse talent promoted, or would it be helpful perhaps to have a non-line of business executive sponsor help in promoting that person's candidacy and helping them develop their skills?
I'm a big fan of what you stated around the 360 review process. I believe that there has to be people that report to you, other folks that report to you. I believe that there has to be people that you report to. I believe there has to be colleagues. It has to be a very well-rounded experience. I also believe that there needs to be a diversity officer in the room as well to advocate. I believe that 90% of my job as a diversity officer is advocacy. We are standing up for those who do not have a voice or who may be shy or do not have the opportunity to speak in these rooms. So yeah, I'm a firm believer in 360 review process.
I would agree with Kathleen and Tiara too about 360s, and not just to understand, and get that feedback from people who report to you, people who are peers and those who are senior, but also to really understand how you're perceived. So don't choose people who know you best, or you might know what they would say anyway, but choose people who you want to be able to influence, that people whose contributions to your work are essential to your being able to get ahead. And in terms of promotion, you absolutely need people outside of your line of business.
Yep.
To know your work, to know you and your potential. At a certain point in your organization, just your manager's ability and opinion is not going to get it done. If you want senior leadership roles, there are people in that room who are going to have the opportunity to weigh in. And if they don't know you, there's just less advocacy for your ability to get that next opportunity.
And thinking about, more formal programs, right? There's mentorship, there's sponsorship, and they are different. And often people don't know they're being sponsored, right? It's more, there is that advocate who can speak on your behalf and look for opportunities and socialize. And it's really important, the networking and getting connected and having access is really key. And not everybody has the same access and has the same network, and so having programs that help to connect people and taking advantage of opportunities such as, I know we've all mentioned the employee resource groups a lot, and the reason we have is because they are really critical to helping to foster an inclusive culture and to educate and to bring people together, and they also help with networking and connections and allows people to step outside of their day job and be seen in a different light, and provides access to leaders or folks in other areas of the organization that you may not have exposure to. And so all of that is really key. And so thinking about ways that you as individuals can build that network or help to connect is really important. And then on the flip side, from the company's perspective, having programs that are more formal in providing this advocacy is also key.
Exposure is so important. I'm huge on exposure. I structured our ERGs. So every lead, we do the rotations. They're in the role for 2 years. When they come out, when they're in the role for those 2 years, they have priority to get in front of senior leadership. They have priority in picking to sit on different panels, to have that exposure, to be in rooms that you normally wouldn't have the opportunity to sit on. Because if you're doing this outside of your day-to-day job, you should be highlighted, you should be spotlighted, and you should be known for the extra work that you're doing to create an inclusive culture, to create, retention within our organization. So our structure is all about exposure.
That's great. Let's see, I see Alibe. Is that you?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
I think so.
Hi, my name is Alibe Hammaker, and I run a corporation that deals with Thank you. My consultancy deals with global issues, so I deal with a lot of people every day globally, and I work with a lot of members of the UN and nonprofits. But Tiara, you said something something that really touched me. When I started my career, I graduated from John Jay College, which is a community college. Mm-hmm. But my internship started with somebody who was a Harvard graduate. I had to go to the Harvard Club, interact with those people. And the first day, it was awful. I mean, for me, not for him. I was all dressed up. I was all nervous, sweating like crazy. I can relate to these people. I'm not from the high class, right? All of the above.
Yeah.
I entered the room, and I started working what I know, what I knew, what I was going to present. And little by little, I started realizing that, there are people just like me. I have my stories, I have my experience, I'm very good at what I do. And, once I jumped that, I took it from there, and I've been very successful. So from that story that you just told and my story, is there any where in the future that we are not going to have to put in our own because of all these filters that we are putting in between? I mean, I know a lot of people from community college and from prestigious college. They are equally passionate about their work. They are equally involved and talented at what they do. But we keep on putting these filters, and we are building barriers for wonderful people to even approach that job. So I love what we are trying to do, and I love what your companies are doing. I love the value of the allyship, but when are we going to take it to the next level?
That's an excellent question. I too started at Borough of Manhattan Community College, and then went to NYU. But I wasn't accepted at first. I had to write an essay about how I gave up some basketball scholarships to come to New York and dreamt of being a woman on Wall Street. So I know the intimidation. I do not come from a wealthy family, very, very humble beginnings, single mother. That's why I mentioned that example. One day, I absolutely hope that we can get there. I want to go into an interview without having to not put Williams. Without having to delete Williams from my last name because they're going to know I'm Black, or to take out my braids because I don't think they're going to think I'm white enough. Plenty barriers and filters. I would love to get to that point. Honestly, from my personal opinion, and I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts as well, I need to see those numbers because I need accountability right now. I need to know who is getting rejected, who's applying and getting accepted, who is getting through those barriers of the recruiters who are looking for that specific type. And I think once we get to a place, and hopefully, I pray to God that is sometime soon, we can remove those filters. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, I think you bring up an excellent point in that we can have policies and processes that can help identify candidates and move them through the process, but if folks aren't even applying, they're not in the mix. And so how do we diversify the pool of applicants, and what are we doing to expand that? And one of the things we have is a talent acquisition diversity strategist on the team who is not a recruiter. This individual is solely focused on mitigating any potential bias in our hiring processes and thinking about ways and strategies that we can expand that pool. And we're not there yet, right? We keep working hard at this, and the network piece of it and the external, connections and partnerships and working, meeting with different people so that you can expand who we know outside the company and encourage folks to apply or let them know, build relationships, and then when we do have opportunities, then maybe nudge and encourage. Again, we work through our employee resource groups. We have a program where we call it Talent Tuesdays, and we highlight certain roles at the company, and we ask them to reach out to their networks, which will broaden the pool. And just trying to think about different ways, but you're absolutely right. Like if people don't, if the job description themselves, right? What's the job description? Yeah. So that's another thing, and that's something we continue to work on. Looking for ways to what words are being used and how the qualifications. If it's so stringent, and thinking about potential. We talked about that earlier, right? And so there's lots of different ways, but there's we have to keep at this because it's really important.
Something that we have seen where corporations have been very successful is one of our clients was having the same problem because they felt, well, we don't have the candidates, they don't apply. So one of the suggestions we made about, among many others, was like they needed to go and look for candidates in other places. They were looking primarily at the Ivy schools, and they weren't finding a diverse pool of employees. So we directed them to go to other schools, but not only look at the other schools, but also to go and talk to the schools, to the students, because oftentimes what happens with certain corporations, what we found out through our research, is that people are intimidated and they feel, well, I shouldn't apply to this company or that other company because they only take, Ivy League students, so why would I even waste my time? But something interesting that happened to me yesterday, someone called me up and said, I'm having difficulties finding a job, wanted my advice. And he's a white male, middle-aged candidate, highly qualified, but he was saying all the positions applying to, they're saying they want, a diverse candidate. So now I feel, I'm being discriminated against. So I thought, well, this is interesting because for many years it was, the other way around. So I think to give credit to some corporations, they're trying to make an effort and they are going for a more diverse pool of candidates. The main issue is once they get them into the companies, what do they do to really retain them and to make them really excel at the job? Because I also heard many stories where diverse people are being hired, but then they're being left, as a statistic number in an office doing whatever they're doing, but nobody pays any attention. So,
and they won't stick around, right?
No, they won't
right?
stick around. Nobody is happy knowing that they are just statistics hires. So we need to make sure that they can be promoted and they can access, positions of power and decision. Unfortunately, we are at 12:30, which I think is time to end this very, very interesting session. But I want to thank every one of you, Kathleen, Tiara, for this incredible knowledge that you share with us, but more importantly, the fact that we talk about very concrete experiences and things that you're doing within your organization, and that you were, very honest with us and acknowledge some of the challenges that you're facing. But what gives me hope is that you also talk about some initiatives that they're doing, that they're working within your organization, and that give us hope that things can change. And I think just bringing awareness and having this diverse audience here with us today, sharing all their experiences and learning from everything that we've been hearing today is so inspiring to me. So thank you so much, and I would stay here for more.
So that was a powerful panel, was it not? That was fantastic. Phenomenal. And we have the ladies well represented. One more round of applause for the ladies that represented on this panel. Fantastic. Phenomenal. And I got 2 pages of notes off of this panel, so I'm going to just try to distill some of the wisdom that I learned from these very impressive leaders. Marcela, you talked about developing metrics and not just sentiment, but also getting the facts. And that was a theme that I felt reverberated throughout this panel around data and getting analytics. In fact, I believe it was Kathleen who also reinforced this idea of getting the analytics. Yau, you said those who influence systems have to mitigate bias, ally for each other, reach down and pull each other up. Those were wonderful words. You talked also about the importance, and we just had a dialogue about this. Marcela, you lifted this up, making room for different styles, and that we really have to embrace that there is different ways that we all lead, ways that we show up. Kathleen, you said we have to have those brave and courageous conversations, which was very much a reflection of what we had heard prior, when we talk about the importance of bravery, courage, and how these conversations open our understanding of one another, bridge our differences, and begin to address the very biases that we talked about earlier. And then, Tiara, you had two things that were on my spirit. One is you talked about having to humanize it, and you're a storyteller, so you're certainly channeling your humanization of others as you tell stories, which I appreciated your stories. But then you said something I'm going to close on my reflections on the panel was, we have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Something you said early on in the discussion, and that's something that we all have our comfort zone, and then we have our growth zone. And the line between the comfort zone and the growth zone is discomfort. And so the more we get comfortable with being uncomfortable, the more we grow. So if you're not feeling any discomfort, it means you're not growing. And part of this journey for all of us is in the growth. So my takeaways, not what was said, but what I took, don't just be at the table, have a voice at the table. It is not an either or. We can have a targeted strategy that addresses the unique needs of unique communities, but we can also have a universal goal that is of diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a scholar, John Powell, who calls that targeted universalism, a targeted goal under a universal umbrella. And my final point on this panel, Yau, you lifted this up in your story, but it's something I've heard over and over again in my travels. The simplest thing that we can do if we want to further our walk for diversity, equity, and inclusion is just reach out to people and say, how are you doing? Like sometimes it's that simple. I've had some of the most powerful responses from people from different communities who said, I so appreciated the fact that you just reached out to me to say, how you doing? I just checked in. So one more round of applause for the panel for an outstanding job. That's 4 applause for this panel. Thank you, ladies. You can take your seats. Thank you, ladies. And so as we move toward lunch, I'm going to put in a shameless plug. This whole conversation about data, I have a deadline on Wednesday for my next book, and I'm behind schedule. So when I leave here, I'm going back to write. And that book is Data-Driven DEI, how data can drive a diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda. And so I need you all to pray for me that I meet this deadline next Wednesday, because I'm in trouble right now. I'm behind. This whole weekend is a writing weekend. So we're going into lunch. Now, I was here last year, so I'm going to give you all, get everyone's attention. We're going to move into the afternoon. How were the elevators? Fair enough. Well, I at least gave you the warning, but it looks like we do have a good contingent of folks who've made it back for the afternoon. Raise your hand if you met someone new during lunch. Okay, give yourself a round of applause. That's what this is about. Yeah, that's right. That's right. I love it. Yeah, I mean, the summit has a motto, if you didn't know. It's the 3 C's: connect, collaborate, and contribute. That is the motto of this summit. So you've already lived out the values of this summit by meeting somebody new. I encourage you, we have another break coming this afternoon to continue that journey of expanding your networks, meeting new people, making connections. It's been a while for many of us that we've been in the same room and not the same Zoom. And I see a couple of familiar faces I've met online. I must tell you, you all look taller in person than you did on my screen. Nevertheless, we're going to move into the afternoon, and let me offer this just as a segue to the afternoon. We're here talking about new majority allyship. I was having a conversation with Sandeep and one of our afternoon panelists, EJ, about this idea of allyship, which has multiple interpretations, multiple meanings, multiple experiences. I mean, we're talking about new majority allyship for today, although there are other aspects of allyship that are appropriately part of today's conversation. This new majority allyship is about how we're bridging across what were formerly minority and now new majority communities. But there's also these other related ideas of allyship within the corporate context, which Sandeep spoke to, and his argument was that there's a lack of allyship in the corporate context. You heard from Frankie and Joanne, who called each other sibling organizations. They talked about how there's lots of allyship that they're seeing in the community context. EJ then, as we were discussing, reminded us that there's this idea of members of the former majority culture allying on behalf of the former minority culture. And so there's lots of interpretations and experiences of allyship. Let's not get them confused. They're all in the same genre, but they take on different forms and fashions. And so we're about to move into the first presentation for the afternoon, and I'm going to do my job and remind you, because somebody just asked me for my Twitter handle, which is @RandallPinkett with 1L. And so tag each other, post, again, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, take your pick. Wherever you are, LinkedIn, I forgot LinkedIn this morning. I know there's a lot of ERG folk here. I know you are LinkedIn people, so I'm not mad at that. That's where we're a little more conservative with what we post appropriately. I understand. We don't get too political. Nevertheless, please, again, for those who couldn't be here, we want them to share in the experience, and social media gives us that wonderful ability.